Dear respected Day, dear 12-step Zen Sangha, thank you for having me tonight. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you. We have just listened to the guided and music infused meditation of our dear teacher Tay, the Father-Mother meditation. And especially in the context of a 12-step Zen Sangha, it is a very relevant meditation and challenging and painful, I have felt. Because what Thay does is he brings us back to our 5-year-old self. And as a 5-year-old self, we know that we don't necessarily have the freedom of choice to control our lives, to make decisions, but more being the child and having made decisions for us if we want it or not, if it's painful and causes us harm or not. And Thay also invites us to see our parents, to see ourselves being fragile and vulnerable, and getting in touch with our parents, which maybe we have thought at that age contributed or caused our suffering, maybe caused our addiction. Maybe they themselves were alcoholics. Maybe they themselves were suffering, and we were there, and they didn't know to teach us better. And maybe we judge them and we blame them, or we are still hurt from that. Maybe we have been abused verbally, physically. So it is not easy to turn around and look back and face our parents in that meditation. But what Thay also does in here, and he does that very consciously, with full awareness and compassion, is to have a look at our parents when they were 5 years old. To look at their inner child being fragile, being vulnerable, suffering. And I have been very able to be transported back, hearing stories from my dad and my mom when they were children, and they come immediately and pop up when I see them, just as vulnerable as I saw myself as 5 years old. And I felt just their same pain when Thay asked us to look at their suffering as I felt when I was in touch with my suffering. So there was a compassion arising, and I was about to cry because I saw I cannot really be mad at them. I cannot be really angry at them because they were hurt themselves. They were hurt themselves, and they were in the same position like I was. Had no freedom of choice, had no control over their lives. Their lives were controlled by their parents, who didn't know themselves, who might have been addicted themselves and didn't know how to practice, how to handle, and how to educate and grow their children. So it is important to look back through our parents, not stopping there and dumping our anger, our frustration, our pain at our parents, but to transcend that, looking back through them and see our whole ancestral stream flowing through ourselves, through our parents, coming from our grandparents, our grand-grandparents. And that is our topic today, transforming our ancestral stream. So you see how many people it needed for us to be alive, And to be here now is not only limited to our parents. We have two parents, a father and a mother, which themselves have a father and a mother. That makes 4. Our great-grandparents, it makes 8. By the time we come to our 9th great-grandparents, we talk about 2,050 people, around 2,050 people contributing to that stream and spanning around 400 years. Now that continues, and they just become more. By the time we hit our 18th great-grandparents, we speak about 1 million, more than 1 million people behind us. How many struggles, how many battles, how many difficulties, how much sadness and pain is washing over us in this very moment when we become aware of us as a vulnerable 5-year-old child. At the same time, let's not forget the good times. How many hopes, how many good qualities, how many laughters, great visions and happiness also came and is washing or is blowing through us too. And who is to blame here? Can we really look back and blame our parents for not being fair, for not being there, for not being parents we needed, for not having love, for not knowing how to love us and how to give us what we needed most? Somehow it is, I'm reminded of a relay race, you know, when people run around in the stadium and they have that stick and you just run and you put that stick in the hand of the next person, and this person is just taking it without asking anything and runs as fast as it can and passes on the stick without even knowing what they are doing. They just know they have to pass it on as quick as possible. Sometimes I'm reminded like that what has been passed on to us is so hot and so painful that we just want to get rid of it, and we run as fast as we can to the next person that we can give it to, and they will take it and we think we are free. But maybe this is too late then. So the question is more how we can be and how we can practice in that very moment that this relay stick or the stream is flowing through us, or this stick is passed to us. And alcohol comes also a long way. It was not invented in our generation. It was not invented in our parents' generation. Coming from Europe, alcohol was a very big part during the times of diseases, of the Black Disease, when you were not able to drink water because you could die if you drank water. So in order to be safe, even kids were given beer and wine and liquor just to be disinfected and hydrated in the same time. So it is deeply rooted in our culture. And growing up in Germany, I know that it is not a big deal to drink a beer for the meal times, even for breakfast sometimes at weekends. Look at Southern Europe, like Italy, Spain, Croatia, where you drink a lot of wine. And even here in America, I think alcohol is the only drug you have to justify not taking when you are somewhere. When you are offered a drink and you say, thanks, I'm not drinking, they say, come on, why is that? And you have to justify yourself why you don't take a drug, which obviously and so very well known for everyone is the cause for so much suffering. In every family can tell you that. So we also have to look at ourselves, looking back, but also looking at ourselves and asking ourselves, when did it happen for me? And how did it happen? And why did it happen? When I look back into my own story, into my own history, when I turn back and I see myself as a 5-year-old, I see my granddad drinking, being probably an alcoholic. I don't know by that time, but my parents said so, that he probably was an alcoholic. And he was in World War II, and he never talked about World War II, but he started drinking afterwards. I have some of my Croatian cousins who fought in the civil war in Croatia from 91 to 95. After freeing and liberating their country from communism and liberating it to a democracy, they enslaved their mind, becoming alcoholics. So they fought for a good cause, enslaving themselves because they could not deal with what had happened to them. It was too overwhelming. My very dad's brother, also the son of my granddad, was an alcoholic and died with 36 with liver cancer. Although he was clean by then for around 6 years, had married, had a 6-year-old child, a boy, and left them. The aftermath of that. And I remember as a kid, George, my uncle, coming to our house in the middle of the night, and my parents, I waking up and coming down to the door, and my parents talking to him. I could clearly see that they were suffering, and he came to ask for money because he had a good connection with them. He asked for money to continue his tour, and he came by car, and he was obviously very drunk. And sometimes they gave him something, and sometimes they talked to him to stay for the night and to go to sleep, but he didn't want. And I was just standing there, and as a kid, like you don't talk, you just take everything in, and it was so painful. And I saw the pain of my uncle, I saw the pain of my parents, and I felt it was just very heavy. And sometimes when they let him go with or without money, I asked them, why did they do that, or why did they let him drive? And they said, you cannot, he wouldn't understand. He's in a different state, they said. So sometimes when I slept at my grandma's place, and George would be there, and he wanted to play with me, but he had drunk already, and I knew. I was afraid of him, and he was just wanted to play with me, and he lifted me up, and I started crying because I was afraid. He didn't hurt me, he didn't harm me, he didn't want to do me harm, but I was in touch with his pain, and it caused me pain, and when he just lifted me up, laughing and smiling, I started crying. And my grandma shouted at him, yelling that he shall let me go. And I feel so sorry for that, because he was so suffering at that time anyway with himself. And I was so afraid, and I caused grandma to yell at him. So I had that experience. And my dad never drank. My dad had a time when he retired, and it became I think his life became meaningless when he started drinking secretly, and everybody knew because we smelled it. And my mom intervened on time. So there is something like a gene when I hear that. The A gene. And I myself, when I came to the point in my life, Pete was mentioning it when I had my life change, and I was questioning everything I do. Do I feel fulfilled? Do I want to continue the life I live? I was working still, had unsatisfying relationships, was not happy with myself. I started exactly that, what I saw brought so much suffering to my family. I started drinking. And luckily I was a driver. My job was a driver. So I could not get deep into it, and I could fish myself out of it on time. But I would drink when I came home until I had to go to sleep. And then in the morning I would go there and drive again and come home and drink until I found out I'm still not sober in the morning, and I have a responsibility, and how far do I want to take it? And that's my livelihood and my job. And I could pull myself out. Maybe also being in touch with that pain of my family. But I had to ask myself, how did that happen to me? How did I very likely become an addict myself? And I found for myself that I distrusted. I didn't trust my parents. I didn't trust my grandparents, my uncle. Looking back and feeling the pain and blaming them for not being there for me when I needed them as a kid, for the time I was suffering, for being a fragile and vulnerable kid without any means, without any power, without the freedom of choice, of decision making for himself, not being able to speak for himself. I blamed them, that they are the cause of my suffering, and they pushed me into that. So I had to distrust them, saying that they don't know how to deal with children, and they don't know wisdom, and they don't know life, because it has not been given to them, or they have not been taught by their parents. And now they want to transmit their not knowledge to me. I'm not taking this. I said that as a child, as a young child, I felt that. So I disconnected with my parents because there was no trust that they can teach me anything. And I had that inner wisdom a kid has, like how the world should be. And I was still connected with my true self, with my wholeness, with my beingness, what a human being is, what the true nature of a human being is. And that was clearly not what they wanted or taught me. Poor them, actually, when I look back. But I disconnected with them, and I tried to find my own path. For so long, growing up as a teenager, and my parents being immigrants, they just want to be diligent and want to be accepted by society, not knowing the German language perfectly, coming from Croatia, not wanting to any trouble, not wanting their kids to cause any trouble, just being good people, diligent, and having a normal life. And I didn't trust that all. And that led me also to explore life differently. But what that also led me to was loneliness, because I was not connected to my folks, to my tribe, because I didn't trust them, I disconnected from them, but there were the people I lived with, and there were the people I cared for deep inside. So I felt lonely. And instead of communicating, of expressing my hurt, of sharing my pain with these people who are closest to me, and coming from the inside and addressing the inside of these people, instead of doing this, I was doing exactly the opposite. I was doing that what I was blaming. I was looking to fulfill my loneliness and to fill my loneliness from the outside with the things I have seen they did to fill their loneliness, their suffering. I should have known better. When I hear in the meditation Thai saying, I see the suffering of my father, or is in me. My father is in me. I can see that, and I can see my dad in me. And this is the moment I reconnected, I reconciled with my dad. I said, yes, I am a continuation of you. I am a continuation of that stream. And you are clearly in me, and I am clearly in you, and it is so, so true. And because I am so honest with myself, and I just wanted to grow and to be true, that's why I disconnected in the first place from you. But I cannot be mad at me. And because you are in me, and I am in you, I cannot be mad at you too. And I know that you were once vulnerable and fragile and suffering before you chose a strategy, a fatal strategy to overcome your pain. So now we're sitting here as practitioners, and we have to ask ourselves, first of all, I think we can acknowledge that we are practitioners, because that is the first time maybe in a long line um, of our stream, of our ancestral stream, that somebody stops and wakes up and says, what is actually happening here with me, with my family, stepping back, looking deeply and seeing the context, looking back and transcending that pain, transcending the anger, frustration, the depression we have with our parents, the grandparents, but looking back and seeing the context of it, seeing the whole picture. To be the one to break, I don't want to say break, to transform that ancestral stream. We're talking about, now I use the term, we talk about breaking habits, but we cannot break habits. When you imagine these million people from 18 generation, you cannot break that. That will wash and wipe you out. What we can do is we can recognize it, and of that stream, we can divert those things that we find harmful for ourselves and that did harm to our parents and our grandparents. And us as being the one who had stopped because they have suffered, but because they also have not accepted to suffer, or were still in touch with their true nature, saying, hold on, there is more to it. Being able to differentiate and say, okay, my family has a lot of good qualities and I'm receiving them. They have been passed on to me and I'm receiving them like a good relay stick. And then there are those qualities that brought harm and suffering to my family. And these are not necessarily those I want to pass on to future generations, be it my own kids, be it my nieces, my nephews, be it the future. So when we are able to divert these qualities into a smaller stream and slowly let it dry out, because we don't nurture it anymore, we don't feed it anymore, because we know how to practice, we will be able to transform our ancestral streams in two directions, because we pass on the wholesome seeds, the wholesome qualities, and we let dry out the weed, we call, the harmful seeds. And because we are able to look back and transcend the pain through our parents, through our ancestors, recognizing that it is a stream and there is no one to blame, we are able to forgive ourselves first for having been a little child that was not in control, that could not do anything in that moment to help ourselves, maybe except of distrust and disconnect from these people, but could not just leave the house and saying, I'm gonna build my own house or I'm moving out as a kid. But to forgive yourself, I was not in the position to do something. I had to endure it. I had to live through that. And also forgiving our parents, saying they are not the last ones. They didn't come up with that suffering. That comes a long way, a long and strong way, a long stream. So when we are able to look back with these eyes of understanding and of compassion, being in touch with the suffering they have felt when they were 5 years old, when they were vulnerable, when they were fragile, when they were not in charge of their own decisions. We are transforming our ancestral stream in two directions, starting with ourselves in the very here and in the very now, and radiating it out. It is really like the love, we often says, radiating and transcending everything. So we don't need to go back to the pain we had or to the pain our parents had to heal it there. We heal the pain in the here and now by recognizing the stream and by recognizing and getting in touch with the suffering of all of us. It's not personal, it's pain. Talking about addiction. Addiction, I want to call it, like in Buddhist terminology, we use the word attachment. craving, desire, it's all the same. It's all a vortex, a vacuum cleaner that tries desperately to fill itself, which believes it's empty, with things from the outside, ignoring that our true nature is inside. So we have the three poisons: anger, craving, and ignorance, which are a hindrance to liberation and transformation. And each of them have their own story in Buddhist psychology. What is interesting for us is the craving part, the attachment part, the addiction part. When you are an addict, when you feel you are attached to something, you should ask yourself, why is that so? When did it happen? And how did it happen? In Buddhist psychology, they say it is the fear of being abandoned. This craving comes from the fear. All of these three poisons stem from a fear. The craving part, the fear of being abandoned. In my case, and I'd like you to go back to your own story, that what you have seen during the meditation, what you have felt, what you have been going through maybe again and again. For me, it was the moment when I distrusted my parents and disconnected from my parents. So being honest to myself, I cannot say that I have been abandoned, but I abandoned my tribe by not trusting them, by not seeing the whole picture, only seeing the pain my parents have caused to me, and wanting to disconnect from that, wanting build my own life, my own happiness. Not being able, because too small and also ignorant and not having the means, I needed help from outside, which I found in alcohol, food, other drugs, sex, music, everything, attachment. In our case, alcohol. It's the most common drug, the most accepted drug, the only drug you have to justify not taking. It's sad. There's a remedy too to all of these three poisons. The remedy for craving, which stems from the fear of being abandoned, let's say from the fear of abandonment, is generosity. When we believe we are abandoned, that means we have nothing, we are empty, there is nothing we can give. But that's also ignorant, because we defy the abundance within us, the wisdom in us, the present moment, the wisdom of the present moment, the abundance of the true self in the very here and now. When we start to become generous outwards, we can heal and we can transform this fear, because we see that there is enough, there's more than enough. Little gestures by giving $1 to a homeless person, little gestures by being in the supermarket and the child behind you wants an ice cream and his mother doesn't want it and you buy him one. Maybe it's not a good idea, maybe some mothers don't like that. But you get the message. Be generous outside. When you feel in the immediacy, in your immediate environment, when you see there is something I can give it. And you will feel the richness of life in the eyes of the person, of the gifted person, in the relief of yourself that you have freed yourself from something that you have carried around like a burden. You have freed actually yourself, and you're growing happier by releasing something, being generous. In the same time, for myself, especially when I'm fasting for a week or two, and I'm doing only water fasting, not eating at all, I have these great insights of this balance of giving and taking, of consuming and of producing or generating. Because I'm consuming much less, I'm generating much more, be it presence or steps or thoughts. I'm much more of a producer of energy than a consumer of energy. So I came up with that insight the last fasting I had, that how I can heal and transform this seed of addiction, of attachment, of craving within me, is to generate generosity outwards. And I can feel it, when sometimes the shopper brings things cookies, and I take 2 or 3 to my room just to be sure that I have enough. And to feel guilty later about it when I see some brothers didn't get any because I took 3. So then I go back and offer the leftovers, offer 2 or 1, however much are left. And that gives me every time a lesson, but I'm not learning it so quickly. I'm learning to be more generous outwards and more restrained inwards. This became my practice. I restrain myself because I know that I don't need much, that my body doesn't need much, that my mind doesn't need much. I've been through fastings, I've been through times of suffering, I've been through difficult times, and I could always touch happiness within me and satisfying. I had satisfying moments. I feel fulfillment. I felt peace. It is possible. So I don't need exterior things to consume to be happy. And that balance for me, inner restraint and outer generosity, gives me a sense of what moderation is. To have a moderate life, what the Buddha teaches, the middle way. Not too much, not too little, just the right amount. Many spiritual people say, give the body only what it needs, food-wise, drinking-wise. Don't give it too much. It just needs to function. And everything else, sweet, sour, bitter, spicy, is just our preference, which we developing an identity, but it's not needed. So coming back to the basics, share the abundance with others and be restrained within is very beautiful, gives you a lot of space and makes you free and light and happy. So to practice with that, to come to the practical part, is first having an insight. The insight is the first noble truth, as is the first of the 12 steps. There is suffering. That's what the Buddha said. There is a problem. I have a problem. I have suffering. We first have to admit that. And then, as we said, we look more deeply. We have to become still in order to retouch this true nature, which we were in touch with, which we have lost, which we have tried to feed with external poison, which didn't work, which has brought us to this very moment where we are able to stop, to breathe gently, to calm our body and mind, and to just by looking inwards, looking back, looking deeply inside, finding wisdom, because it's been there all the time. And all what we need is to be there. And we are there anyhow. We are here all the time. To be there fully for ourselves, to look inside, to calm down the waves of thinking, of agitation, of anger, of suffering, of pain, of blame, guilt, to accept there is a problem. I have a problem. The problem will be happy to be acknowledged. Thanks for finally giving me a space to be. I've been telling you so hard and you never wanted to hear that, and I had to give you such painful lessons. All I wanted is your attention, your presence. We belong to each other. I am in here. All I needed you to be here with me too. And you and me, we are one, right? We're speaking about the same person here. So there is a reason for that suffering. The third noble truth is there is also the cessation of suffering, or as Tai sometimes says, there is happiness. He turns it into positive term. There is suffering, there is a reason for the suffering, a cause. There is the cessation of suffering, meaning there is happiness, and there is a way to happiness. And that way to happiness becomes the first of the Eightfold Path, the first step of the Eightfold Path, the right view. Because when we are able to transcend this view we had on our parents, that we blame external, personal people for our suffering, we are misled. When we see that they are impersonal, that there is impermanence, that everything is changing constantly, and I'm making decisions at every given moment, at least now where I'm in charge, and I have the freedom of choice to make decisions. And I'm old enough to look back to a good period of time. I can develop right view, seeing through the pain, seeing that my parents didn't mean to do me harm. They didn't know better how to practice. See, my grandparents didn't mean to do my parents harm. They didn't know better. It's been just handed to them, and they took the stick and ran as fast as they could to the next generation to pass it on, to get rid of it. It was not easy, and we call it, that's life. Nobody said it will be easy, and we all know it's not easy. It's painful, but it's our life. And if we practice, we can be there for our life, and we can handle it, and we don't need to cover it up. We don't need to numb it, numb ourselves, disconnect, distrust ourselves. At one point, we don't trust ourselves anymore. We don't find the strength. We don't see this true self anymore. But somehow, something in us has never left our little child, our 5-year-old child, these dreamers, those little people who are always in touch with something inside, knowing there is a bigger self in me that can dream, that can see fairies, that has visions, that knows how the world should look like. So what we do is, as practitioners, MCI, mindfulness, concentration, and insight. Mindfulness, recognizing, accepting what is. Be it painful, there is a problem, there is suffering. I'm here for you. I'm sitting down, I'm calming my body, I'm calming my mind, and I'm making space for you. I'm emptying myself, I'm being generous to the outward, I'm making space inside, and I take only very little. Because an empty room has a lot of space. An empty being has a lot of space, has a lot of capacity to also invite pain and invite suffering. Because there is enough space, I have enough capacity. You know the teaching Tai uses with a handful of salt. You put a handful of salt in a cup of water and you drink it, and it's very salty, you cannot drink it. You put the same amount of salt and pour it into a lake, and you drink the lake's water, and it's not salty at all, and it can quench your thirst because the container is so much bigger. So let's make a container, an empty container, out of ourselves. Let's transform our ancestral stream. Let's transform this relay race by receiving what our ancestors have passed on to us, receiving it gratefully and gracefully, because they are our ancestors, and because they are, we are. Receiving whatever they have given to us, trusting ourselves and trusting the connection we do have with them and with ourselves, that we are able to differentiate and to see what was helpful and brought happiness to the lives of my ancestors, my grandparents, my parents, myself, my siblings, and what brought harm and suffering. And to nurture and to hold both of it. To put gently aside into a smaller stream and release it, those things, those seeds that were harmful, that caused pain, we release it. We forgive ourselves, we forgive our parents, we forgive the stream. It happens throughout a stream, it collects dirt, it collects sticks, it collects oil. We know that from literal a river. So let us be the ones who stay there and are able to build and dig a little side arm and let it divert and dry out and nurture and carry on onto that stream the seeds that brought happiness, healing, understanding, compassion, peace, joy, and hand it on to our family, to our kids, to our nieces, to our siblings, to our grandchildren, to our neighbors, to our friends, to our colleagues, to our pets. There are no others. You know, when we practice like this, inwards restraint, keep it empty, outwards generosity, we are empty and we are so huge that we feel that we are the stream. We are the stream, and we can determine, we are in charge. We can steer the stream in the direction we see it is most helpful for us, for the people around us. And we can create a healthy, nourishing body of water that not only nourishes the stream of our ancestors, but also the shore, makes the shore green, and let trees and plants and flowers bloom wherever we pass by. And this is such a beautiful image. I want to stop here. Just bring it in within you. Maybe you want to close your eyes for a moment and see yourself as this transformed stream, knowing what was behind you, knowing where you came from, seeing yourself in that stream, recognizing the pain, recognizing the happiness, being able to hold both with your capacity to love, to accept, to embrace, to be, and gently divert the unwholesome seeds to a sidearm and let them slowly dry out and become air, which becomes rain, which waters the trees and the flowers at the shore, and nurture and make sure that the stream with the wholesome seeds is continuing, flowing down the river and building a happy future for your family, for your family's family, and so on and so on. Thank you for listening.